I did not give the chat here enough of a head start of thinking of their questions because I meant to mention at the top, but we had a lot of stuff going on today. So if you've got a question, if you've got something you want to talk about, throw it in the chat. We've got a couple of warm-up questions from our subscribers at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. If you want to be one of the guys that gets the primary question, gets the fancy graphics, make sure you subscribe $29.99 from now to the start of Penn State football season for inside access, including to the Lion's Den, where you can ask a question on the mailbag thread. So we're going to start with those, and then if you've got a question, we'll get to those here at the end of the mailbag. Best way for me to notice them, by the way, is if you send in a super chat. Always appreciated, but it also shows up in big colored text so that I see it, and I will make sure that I get to it because I'm steering a battleship while also trying to talk to you guys, and sometimes things get through the cracks. Okay, so Poncho570, regular here on the show, says, who has the light turned on for thus far in camp? I'll start the bidding with Trey Wallace. We talked about him as a guy that has separated from the pack. That was not a slam dunk thing that was going to happen. He was a pretty raw player coming in. Last year he flashed. He made some good plays. He got playing time, but I wouldn't say that it was a guarantee he was going to turn the corner. The fact that he separated himself from the group and he is one of the outside receivers, I think that's a big deal. I think that's a bigger deal than Keandre Lambert-Smith being in that group because you should expect that. Who's a guy that you think, from what you've observed and what you've heard and who you've talked to, that you think has turned the corner?
Yeah, so I don't know if it's fair to totally put him in the turn the corner group, T. Frank, but I think it probably is, and Penn State's going to need him to turn into a bigger player if it wants to have the best defense it can. But I've been really interested listening to a couple guys at Pro Day and then some others last night and then again, last night, March 28th, after Penn State practice. But Devon Elise is a guy who has gotten a lot of shot outs recently. And, where we get to watch practice from, it's not always easy to see where the defensive linemen are, what they're doing, things like that. But, when we talk about the leadership question that James Franklin started the conversation about, when, of course, he mentioned the fact that Penn State needs to find that this spring with so many of the captains, all the captains moving on from last year's team, his name just keeps coming up. And I find that very interesting. And I think that, again, I have not seen him do anything in spring practice say, yeah, he's turned the corner, right? I mean, I can't look at it from the same perspective.
Yeah.
But, very interesting to me that his name continues to come up. So he's a guy I'm keeping an eye on here. And then, I think when you look across the board, Harrison Wallace is a really good pick, and there's going to be some receivers in that room that join him in that conversation. And, beyond that, I mean, we're hearing a lot of good things about Cam Miller still, the corner. And I don't want to say the lights. I don't know if it's, again, I don't know. I think I'm trying to phrase this in more of guys like that are buzzing to me, that have maybe not been off the radar and are making more of an impact. I don't know if it's fair to say the lights come on when you talk about Cam Miller, because he's obviously a young player, but he's a guy that's caught my attention. Like, another name that's come up quite a bit. So I guess it just depends when you say turn the light on. I think you're probably looking for guys that are in year 2, 3, that are maybe taking a step forward, and so that's obviously, I get that part of the conversation, but, I don't know how many of those that we've heard about or seen yet that are really super impressive. But, one guy that the light should be coming on for, or needs to come on for, that I would say, I guess, to answer this question more directly, is Malik Mega. And where is he at this point? After he was seemingly high up on the depth chart, fell down it, and now has a fresh start. The new receivers coach. Can it all come together for him? An impressively freakish physical guy who, needs to do more on the field if he's going to earn a bigger role for this team in 2023.
Yeah, if we got to see more one-on-one positional drills, we've seen, I think, maybe twice during the last year and a half that we've been coming to Penn State practice, we might have a better idea of who stands out in those situations. A lot of routes on air, a lot of positional drills, a lot of fumbling or not fumbling going through the fumble drill. So from an on-field perspective, we are a little bit limited in that answer. But when we get through some of the back channel conversations and some of the things that people talk about, as you mentioned, the buzz, I think there's a pretty good list that Greg gave you there. Greg, I want to come back to you with this one because I'll admit I was not listening intently when James Franklin was asked about the special teams yesterday, but he was asked about the special teams competition. Stock up, stock down on special teams this year compared to last year. Competition going on at multiple spots, kicker, punter, and long snapper. What was James Franklin's nutshell of the situation, and how do you feel stock up, stock down about what he said?
At very best, I can be stock neutral at this point. I couldn't possibly be stock up. I don't know how you could be 7 practices into a process that will include replacing literally every part of the special teams for the most part. I mean, I think that I'm not willing to go stock down, though. I think that's unfair to the guys who are competing and who we haven't seen yet in terms of the transfers. Riley Thompson, the punter, and Alex Felkins, the kicker. So I'm not really ready to answer this question one way or the other. I mean, I think that obviously to be stock up at the end of the season, a lot of things are going to have to be impressive because obviously Jordan Stout did a lot for this team last year. But at the same time, or not Jordan Stout, I'm sorry, Barney Moore and Jake Pinniger. I'm going too far back. But, yeah, I mean, I think that, those guys did a lot for this team last year. And, Penn State is going to have to replace them. They have to replace Chris Stoll, the Manley Award winner at long snapper. I believe they need a new holder, if I'm not mistaken. Punt returners is spot. They're going to need somebody new. So, they had a lot to figure out there. James Franklin's answer was, look, the Gabe Lanuso seems to be the leader in the clubhouse for the kickoff job. Penn State fans remember he kicked off a bit last year before Sanders Sahadak took over. Tyler Duzansky, as expected, is going to be the long snapper. James Franklin later saying that, with punter, they're still working through that. It sounds like because of the indoor practices, they haven't been able to get as good of a feel for that as they want. And placement kickers is a battle too with Sanders Sahadak and Riley Thompson and others. So I'm not ready to bury those guys yet and say immediate stock down, but and especially 7 spring practices in. But at the same time, there's a lot of work to do there to figure all this out and make that unit something that can be a weapon for Penn State in 2023. I think it's an under talked about part of this team's story heading into the season. We're obviously a very long ways away from it, but you don't need me to tell you how special teams can win you a game and lose you a game. It can happen very quickly, and it can happen in the hidden yardage that you get from a kickoff out of bounds or a kickoff that's short or a blown lane that leads to a big return. I mean, there's so many things that can go wrong quickly on that part of the field when those guys are out there. So Stacey Collins has a big job ahead of him this year to make this a stock up by the end of the year.
Yeah, and we don't have a 0 yet. We don't have the special teams ace that's going to wear 0 for Penn State. So that's another thing we're going to have to find out. I feel bad that Fitz isn't here. Sean Fitz loves to talk long snappers and special teams, and he missed his opportunity because he had appointments and things today where he couldn't be on the show to talk about special teams when somebody asked about it. So we'll get his answer later, I'm sure. Last question here, and I'll go to the chat one last time after this, though. What are your thoughts about a real, quote, blue-white game? Always a risk with full contact given our depth in some areas, probably the same as a hard practice. Penn State presumably going back towards a real game. James Franklin has said that after last year's modified game and to start spring practice. Bumps and bruises in the front 7, but it sounds like they're still on track for that. Your thoughts on this question here, and what do you prefer?
So, look, it doesn't really make a difference to me, right? I mean, I think that you can learn stuff from both. I think you learn more sometimes from the scrimmage aspect, but I would also say we probably saw more of Penn State's key players, whether they are starters or reserve last year, just with that format. So I guess it just depends what you want to see. But, again, there's only so many chances. I guess the important thing here is not what happens in the blue-white game, right? To me, it's about, do you have enough live opportunities during the spring, whether it's at the blue-white game that you cross that threshold or before it, to really get good evaluations on guys? Manny Diaz put it very well last night. There's not a lot of chances to tackle in spring. There's not a lot of chance to replicate true one-on-one situations at full speed where you are doing everything that you're doing on a fall Saturday on a Saturday in March or, whenever it may be. So I think that's the important thing. I mean, yeah, if you want to go back to the regular blue-white format, I can live with that. I could live with last year's too. It really doesn't make a huge difference to me. The question, though, more so than anything else for Penn State is, will it get enough live reps during this spring practice, or will some of these bumps and bruises, especially up front, that seem to be piling up, notably on the defensive side of the ball, will that cause them to have to change the format? So we'll see. But again, I think the most important thing is if you had enough good, healthy bodies to get live work through the first 7, and you were only able to do one, however many live periods they won, if they got to the blue-white game and said, we don't feel comfortable doing this, but they felt comfortable with the live work they got before, fans are just going to have to live with that as a part of the process in the spring. So I hope that answers the question. If not, I know good subscriber there who'll hit us over on the message board.
I prefer, I think everyone prefers a real game. But even the blue-white game, as it has been over the years, is not like a live game. The scoring is always different. The defense has to be able to score. You've got two different teams with players switching sides randomly during. So it's a practice, but it's about the number of live reps you get. And I thought they did their best last year to do that in that situation. I think we still learned things about Penn State football. For me, that's what I'm most interested in is, are we learning things about the players that we want to know? Like, do we see great routes from guys when we see them at full speed in competition? The offensive line, do we see real push? Do we see, and maybe not even real push because sometimes you're going up against four string, but do you see effective blocking? Can I look at this and go, okay, that was done correctly? And then, of course, the looks like game. I love playing the looks like game. Abdul Carter looks like a monster. He actually ran around and did some tackling and looked really good. Cam Miller looks like he is everything we heard of because he had 2 pass breakups or something like that. So you can still get it either way, but I think you just get a little more about the team with a full quote game than you would what we saw last year. But for most fans, come eat a hot dog, sit in the stands, wear your sunscreen. Make sure you wear your sunscreen. That's a big thing for me every year because it's probably the first time anyone's been outside.